Hello, welcome to another episode of History Hack. Alex has gone and decided to talk to me today. Who have we got on?
That's my evil laugh, because Phil is here. Phil Weir, naval guru, boaty king, and you're going to suffer. Phil, welcome.
Thank you very much, Alex. Glad to be here, as
Tell
always.
everyone why you're here and what boats you're going to talk about today, because this is going to be epic.
Well, I am here to talk about my new book, Dunkirk and the Little Ships. So it's just full of boats, just for Alina. In fact, I think I advertised it to her as Dunkirk and the boaty things. Just
Whole
to
fleet
really...
of boaty things coming at her right now.
There's hundreds of them.
Yep.
Absolutely no way to get away from it.
Nope. Surrounded.
Help me. If anybody starts hearing a clicking noise in the middle of this podcast, that's me signalling for help.
Do you know what's brilliant is that Phil messaged me saying, I've written a book, should we do a podcast? And I was like, yes, because that will wind Alina right up. And then we went and cackled amongst ourselves and then broke it to you. So we have been enjoying this already for weeks.
Thanks very much. I appreciate that.
I've seen the book. It's epic. I love it. It's such a nice little book. It arrived just as I was going off. Where was I going off? Italy, I think. I took it with me, and it was amazing. It's a real nice little companion on the aeroplane. So let's start at the beginning. Let's get this over with before Alina does something to herself. Right, okay. There are lots of people listening that love the boaty things and love hearing about Dunkirk. So frame the scene for us, Phil. Thursday, the 9th of May, 1940. What happens?
Well, on Thursday, 9th of May, 1940, Britain is in a bit of a crisis, basically. The Germans had invaded Norway a little while before. Things had not gone terribly well up there. They'd had to evacuate south and central Norway. There were forces still in northern Norway, still fighting on, but it really wasn't looking good, and Britain was basically in a degree of political crisis. The government of Neville Chamberlain was being seriously blamed for this, and the opposition had brought in a motion to basically a motion of no confidence in the government. And Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain was fighting for his life, and I mean this wasn't the only political crisis that had been going on with the Allies either, because, of course, with the Soviet Union invading Finland, there'd been a lot of Allied prevarication about whether to go to war with the Soviet Union, and the French Prime Minister had been brought down, literally a month or two earlier. So effectively, at that point, politically, neither of the Allies are in great shape. And
it's a slight understatement.
Just a little bit. So yeah, basically, both prime ministers are effectively, French prime minister's already gone, and the British prime minister is pretty much, on his way out as well. Of course, famously Neville Chamberlain won the vote of no confidence, but
nothing else.
His coalition was about to collapse around him, and it was basically told that you need to move out for a more acceptable prime minister to other parties, otherwise government of national unity goes down.
Paving the way for my granddad.
Yes, indeed. Of course, he is replaced by the then First Lord of the Admiralty, the political head of the Royal Navy, at that point, Winston Churchill. And
that was a role he had in World War I, wasn't it? Let's just bring in 2 wars of boatiness to wind Alina up now.
Absolutely. And as he always signed himself off to Roosevelt, the former naval person, which he...
Is that Teddy?
No, it's Franklin.
Ah, okay, because Teddy was head of the US Navy, wasn't he?
Yeah, Teddy was very notable, but Franklin in the First World War was Under Secretary of the Navy, so as I recall. So he also spent some time with the US Navy.
Excellent. Right, okay, so everything's gone to shit, is basically what you've just said.
Yes.
France is in the process of fighting off an invasion. Talk to us about what is happening to the British and French armies up in northern France.
Well, yeah, I mean, this is the grand bit, of course, is that with literally the day the British government is collapsing, Germany decides to invade northern France and Belgium and the Netherlands. So blitzkrieg suddenly occurs. And it's one of these sort of incredible plans. I'm sure everybody kind of knows. There's sort of great jokes about how the French were daft enough not to build their the Maginot Line, the great defences on the French Franco-German border, and didn't build it long enough, so the Germans just go around the top. Kind of a myth, because I mean that's actually kind of what it was designed to do. It's designed to give France strategic space and ensure that the next war is basically fought on Belgian soil and not French soil.
Nice.
So I mean the Maginot Line technically works. All you've got to do then, if you're the French army, is figure out where the German army is going to go through as its invasion route. And of course, you've got from the northern end of the Maginot Line, you've got the Ardennes forests and up through, and there's the sort of central Belgian plain, the Gembloux Gap, and so forth, which is, and the latter's kind of a lot clearer, freer of obstacles and all this sort of stuff. And the Ardennes are a complete sort of nightmare of forests and rivers and all this sort of stuff that's going to slow up an invasion, cause major problems, particularly for in theory, particularly for armored tanks and so forth. So the French basically guess that the Germans are going to go through Gembloux Gap and through central Belgium and gamble all their forces on there. So the day the Germans cross the border on the 10th is a couple of hours later, the French and British forces charge forwards and head towards central Belgium. They also do a bit of a sort of fun bit that not many people kind of remember, but they also, the French also send their 7th Army, which is basically their best formation, through 2 routes. They go first by road up to, or some of them, the mechanized elements, go by road up to Breda in the Netherlands, but they also send additional troops. Doing something the Germans basically can't, incidentally. I'll go into that in a second. But they send their less mobile troops by sea across to the Dutch port of Vlissingen. So it's something the Germans can't do, because basically if they try a naval invasion, which they'd actually done with the invasions of Denmark and Norway, they'd brought most of their troops across on ships. So they try it this time round. The Royal Navy is basically going to sink them, so they don't bother. But so you've basically got this amphibious force going up the coast as well at the same time, and they just sort of bounce into Netherlands and central Belgium. When, of course, famously, the German armoured spearhead, and this is where we sort of go to the things that they can't do. They can't send. Because they don't have the maritime lift capability, because they get sunk, they've got to send their armoured panzers, the tanks basically, through just charging forward without the infantry backing them up. The infantry is just going to be too slow because they can't do the seaborne lift and shift, and they don't have mechanized transport for them. So it's a spearhead thrust, and they send it through the Ardennes. Partly, obviously a great genius move of planning, but, also slightly by accident, because they'd had to change their plans partway through, because a couple of German majors out for a little jolly in an aircraft crash landed in Belgium that winter, and basically had the whole of the German plan to go through central Belgium on them.
So it's an epic fail moment, isn't it?
Just a bit, which of course then leads them to having to obviously change their plan, and they shift into the far more difficult territory of the Ardennes, which they proceed to successfully sort of charge through and sort of smash their way through the lines where they're at their weakest. Because the French don't put a great amount of defence into the Ardennes. They don't think anybody's going to go through it because the forests and so forth are too thick. And they bounce their way through to Sedan and cross the river and start just herring their way round to the Channel coast in order to basically cut off the northern Allied armies, the British and the French, who are obviously sort of in central Belgium and the Netherlands, and cutting them off against the Channel coast.
Okay, so Alina, we're still on dry land. Are you with us?
I am with you. We're still on dry land. No,
we're getting
boatiness.
To the beach now.
Okay, so we're getting closer and closer. Right, I'm with you.
We're at the beach now. Phil, preparation to evacuate has begun just before the Germans reach the Channel. How do they go about it?
Well, this is a fun one. I mean, they sort of see the British particularly see what's coming around about the 18th, 19th of May. It's fairly obvious that the Germans have just sort of smashed through right behind everyone and are heading towards the Channel coast near Calais. So what happens is the British Commander-in-Chief, Lord Gord, who he's a guy who gets a fair bit of criticism, some of it I think probably justified, but as the Duke of Wellington once famously put it, it takes a great general to know when to retreat, and but when the moment comes, basically I think he said something like any fool can advance, so it's knowing when to retreat is the key mark of a great general. And at this point, Gort does the great general bit. He knows that things are completely screwed, and it's time to withdraw back to the coast. So he gets in touch with London and says, basically, I'm under French command, but you've got to give me permission to withdraw. And effectively, they sort of look at the situation in the War Office, and they do so, and they call in the Navy. And the local commander in Dover, Vice Admiral Sir Bertram Ramsay, is given command of any forthcoming evacuation, and he basically heads back to his command post under Dover Castle. He's got this set of tunnels under Dover Castle from which he's basically controlling the sector through the Dover Straits, and he starts sort of amassing plans. And I mean, there's a degree to which I won't say some of this is easy because it's blatantly not, but there's stuff in place already. Ramsay's command is effectively there to support the British Expeditionary Force anyway. So he's already got sort of civilian troop ships and batch of destroyers there. And because of the invasion, of course, forces have been shifting south already from the home fleet and the Humber and so forth, just in case to sort of maintain control of the Channel. So things have been amassing already, but obviously he's sort of sat there looking at it, and he's got effectively what he needs is ports, particularly because he needs ports to get supplies into the army if they're ever going to try and break back out again. Or alternatively, if you're going to lift a lot of people in a short space of time, then you need ports. You've got to get them straight onto ships, because taking people off of a beach is a very slow process, because you've got to have small, very shallow draft boats to just sort of go in to the shore, pick people up and ferry them back out to the bigger ships that then take them back across the Channel. More on that a bit later.
The leader's like, yay!
We're on to boaty bits now.
Yeah, we are. We've hit the water. Are you glazing over yet, buddy?
No, I'm kind of still here.
Okay.
I'm waiting for the snoring.
Yeah.
He's starting to assemble stuff and figure out what he's going to need to be doing. And obviously, he figures that given the Luftwaffe is going to be bombing the hell out of ports, he's probably going to have to take some people off the beaches as well. So he starts looking to assemble shallow draft boats. I mean, initially, they alight upon sort of 50 or so Dutch barges that have evacuated the Netherlands as the Netherlands sort of surrenders, and the Netherlands falls on the 14th or so. And the Dutch navies come across, and various other chunks of their Dutch maritime powers has come across, including a fleet of barges, which look to be really quite useful. And they just also start robbing from all sorts of other places. But as I say, first things first, he needs ports, and as soon as the Germans kind of reach the coast, he's basically looking at sort of 3-4 ports. There's Calais, which is the nearest to the Germans, Boulogne, Dunkirk, and still at this stage Ostend in Belgium, because of course the Belgians are still fighting, and that's a great port, but you'd have to shift the army fairly significantly if you were going to head for Ostend. But these are your sort of safe ports that they need to hold. So they send a force over to Calais to try and help hold that. Force over to Boulogne to help hold that. So start delivering forces there. They also start literally the day sort of after Ramsay's given command. They start withdrawing what are called useless mouths, the supply troops, the admin troops.
It's just the guys unloading crap off of transports and supply stuff, isn't it? Yeah, and the lorry drivers shifting stuff out to the front. Because, I mean, obviously the army's withdrawn a lot from Belgium, so the supply lines are a lot shorter anyway, so they can start getting shot at people. So, yeah, people start leaving from Dunkirk on the 20th. And, I mean, the French actually start doing the same. It's seldom remembered, but the French start doing the same at the same time. So Vice Admiral Abrial, who is Ramsay's opposite number, starts ordering his useless mouths out, including, incidentally, it's a marvellous little story, the remnants of some of the Dutch army who get put aboard a ship called the Pavon and sent to go and reassemble across at Cherbourg as the core of a new Dutch army. But unfortunately, the convoy they're with, the Luftwaffe spots them basically on their way out that evening, and they get bombed. And one of the destroyers gets hit and has to run aground on the beaches at Dunkirk itself. And if you've ever seen, I'm sure you probably remember from particularly some of the literature and adverts for the 2017 movie, the sort of big 3-stack destroyer with the bow blown off of it. It's that. It's her. It's this we haven't
destroyer
reached
that got
destroyers
hit
yet with Alina's education.
Well,
that's a kind of middle-sized boat, Alina.
So not the big boat, not the little boat, the middle boat.
Yeah,
basically.
Okay. But it's a ship. But anyway, we'll revisit this later.
We'll talk more about destroyers fairly soon. I think we might actually get Alina's attention with one of them fairly shortly, I hope.
Is there a Polish person on it?
There's quite a few Polish people, actually, about 100 or so.
Now she's listening now.
Yeah.
I hear Poland, I'm in.
Cool. Okay. Where are we? We're at the one with the destroyed bow.
Yes, we're at the sunk destroyer on the beaches. So yeah, I mean she's basically run aground before the main evacuation begins. But yeah, gets hit by a bomb. Her captain runs her aground and abandons before the fires reach the magazine, and obviously the fires do reach the magazine, and that's why there's a very, very large hole in the bow, and the bow's basically blown off. So yeah, that's one of the escorting destroyers is hit and sunk.
Sorry, Alina, the bow is the front pointy bit.
It's the pointy end. Okay,
yeah.
Not the back, the front.
The front.
Yes.
Okay, yeah. I'm in.
Okay, and that causes one of the great sort of famous scenes on the beaches, and that's kind of one of the things that faces British and French troops as they arrive in Dunkirk, and they sort of go onto the beach and see this 1,000-ton, 1,500-ton warship that's just sort of been run aground with the bow blown off of it. It's going to cause quite an effect, I would have thought. But further up the coast as well, I mean, the Pavon also gets hit, gets run aground near Calais, and unfortunately, when Calais falls, the remnants of the Dutch army basically gets captured there, and so that first attempt at evacuation that first day is a bit of a disaster, but they do sort of keep going, and there's a good kind of 30,000 men brought out of Dunkirk before you actually hit the evacuation point. And by about the 26th, they realise that it's pretty hopeless. The French command system is breaking down. They've lost sort of one of their generals in a car accident, and the French commander-in-chief, General Gamelin, has been fired and replaced by General Weygand, who, I mean, his first action is to cancel an attempted breakout of the Dunkirk pocket. So, I mean, it's really not looking good, and the Germans are sort of continually closing in, and by effectively the midday on the 26th, I think it is, Calais falls, and a few hours later, the order to evacuate, Operation Dynamo is to commence, is ordered. And that's the signal for Ramsay to go. And basically, as Ramsay's assembled his destroyers, which is, as you say, destroyers are these sort of maids of all work for a fleet. They're small-ish, 1,500-ton warships that are well armed with guns. They've got torpedoes to hit battleships, and depth charges to hit submarines. And they're sort of
they're the fun boats, aren't they? That's what you'd want to be on.
They're the do-it-all escorts and submarine hunters and all this sort of stuff, and they're fast. I mean, they're all sort of 35 or so knots of speed. I mean, they're very quick, very maneuverable. They're great little ships. So he's got about sort of 30 or so of these. He's got 30 or so troop ships, and again, most of these troop ships are all cross-channel ferries. They're all again in the sort of 1,000, 2,000 ton range displacement. They'll each carry about 1,000 people. The troop ships, you could probably usually get about sort of 600-700 aboard a destroyer, because obviously the destroyers are warships. They've got guns and cramped passageways and all this sort of stuff, whereas the troop ships are designed to shift people. And bear in mind, as I say, most of these troop ships are the ones that actually brought the British Expeditionary Force across to France in the first place. So they're kind of there to support the army. And they basically get underway on the 26th, and the evacuation really starts in earnest. With regard to the whole sort of evacuation, as I say, you've got basically now 300 and change thousand men sat trapped on the beaches and in the port at Dunkirk. You've lost Calais, you've lost Boulogne, so you're now pretty much down to Dunkirk, and you really can't reach Ostend. And the Belgians are warning that they're going to collapse fairly soon, which they do on the 28th. So that blows Ostend out. And as predicted, the Germans have battered large amounts of the port facilities at Dunkirk. So looking at a fairly tricky situation. And initially it's the destroyers and the troop ships going over from Britain, and getting people out of the port and starting to use their own lifeboats, basically, to ferry guys off the beaches. But obviously, they need to speed up the process of getting people off the beaches, particularly. I mean, realistically, as what you need is almost a timetable like train service. I mean, you know how the underground works. It's you get a bunch of ships in there, moor them up, load them up, get them out, reload the port with people, get the ships in there, load them up, get them out, and you need a smooth flow of people and ships going in and out to get the maximum effect of getting people out. And then obviously at the other end, unload, refuel, rearm if necessary, and head back across. So it's all got to try and work almost to a timetable. Now that sort of timetable is put together by Captain Michael Denny on Admiral Ramsay's staff. And of course, this timetable is kind of reliant on people not being bombed, which is
not only that, but is it not utter carnage? How realistic is it to establish a timetable and try and get people to stick to it?
It's phenomenally difficult, and there are interruptions. Is confusion. I mean, they do incredibly well at this, given the circumstances. Given you've got one damaged port that's constantly fairly consistently under air attack while it's during daylight hours. Increasingly, as the Germans get in, artillery starts hitting as well. So they do remarkably well. They really do. But yeah, I mean, there are interruptions. There's times when they think that the port is closed, so they send people to the beach when it's the port's fine, and it slows things down by sort of tens of thousands of people. They could probably have got either more people out or people out slightly earlier if they hadn't been under constant attack and there'd been all these sorts of problems. But yeah, it's phenomenally difficult, but they do very, very well at it. But yeah, they know that they need more small boats to get people off of the beaches as well as the ports, because Dunkirk by this point is now sufficiently damaged as a port that there's really only one bit that they can really use, and that's the breakwater, famously the mole. That they don't actually exist. It's not actually generally used for ships mooring, so they have to kind of test it with one of the troop ships first to see if you can actually tie a 2,000-ton ship to it without it just sort of collapsing.
Yeah.
Which remarkably it actually managed to survive and continues to do so. But yeah, that's kind of the logistic difficulty that they've got. So they start trawling for all sorts of boats. They start off really with literally anything that floats in the southern naval ports. I mean, you're talking lifeboats from ships under refit. So the lifeboats of the flagship of the home fleet get nicked and taken across. Ramsay's personal admiral's barge gets taken across and gets sunk. I don't know if I'd have wanted to have been the young sub-lieutenant in charge of that one, but yeah, and Ramsay
breaking the news to us.
Yeah, sorry, sir. I regret to report that I lost your admiral's barge. Oops.
Ouch. Although, had it made it back, you'd have wanted to cruise back into a British port on that, wouldn't you?
Well, yeah, absolutely. That would have been decent homecoming there, but yeah, unfortunately he sank it, or rather somebody else did. So yeah, that's the initial bit, but simultaneously they realise that they're going to need more than that. But fortunately, on about I think it's the 14th so give or take about the same time that Sedan is being taken. The Admiralty and the Ministry of Shipping put out a call on the BBC and say, look, if anybody's got a boat that's over 30 foot long, please can get in touch with us and register it, because the initial intent is that they're going to need it for just for sort of harbour patrols and ferrying guys.
Like urgency of the request kind of crap on that, though.
Well, yeah, they all of a sudden realise that this is going to be absolutely perfect for taking people off of a beach. So, remarkably enough, by about the 26th, they've got this list of boats that they think will be suitable anyway. This is all organised by a chap called Rear Admiral Lionel Preston, by the way, head of the small boats pool, and he sort of says to Ramsey, got this list of small boats that we were going to use for just general harbour duties and so forth. That's suitable for us? And, well, yeah. So they then sort of send Minister of Transport guys and sailors from Chatham down the Thames with orders to just nick anything off of the list and anything else that's suitable as well.
At what point do the people who own the boats realise what they're needed for?
It takes a while. There's this famous story of one guy who actually spots, and I think it might have actually been naval sailors taking the damn thing, taking his boat away off up the Thames, and he chases it up as far as Teddington Lock, I think it is.
That's quite a way.
And he sort of catches up with them there, and suddenly finds himself confronted with what I suspect were probably a bunch of guys with guns and in uniform saying, yes, this is entirely illegal what we're doing. Bye. And just sailing off in his boat. I mean, you get the sort of famous bit from the 1958 film of them of people taking their own boats up and particularly assembling at a boatyard called Tufts Boatyard, and famously that does actually happen. And some of the boat crews, the boat owners, take their ships on further to Chatham, which is the first assembly point where they then get handed to naval crews, because key myth, of course, it's all civilians manning their own ships and vessels and so forth, and it's kind of not. It's sailors out of the Chatham barracks.
So is Lightoller different because he's an ex-merchant mariner?
Lightoller was a fabulous story.
Or did he just do whatever the hell he wanted? Because that's kind of the guy he was.
A bit of both, really.
Yeah.
As you say, Lightoller is just a fabulous story. Senior surviving officer of the Titanic. He 2 years later, because of course as a White Star Line officer, he's Royal Naval Reserve as well. He gets called up, and he's on another liner that gets turned into an armed merchant cruiser to do the Northern Patrol, the blockade stuff. And she runs aground, I think, in the Orkneys. So he's on another liner that gets sunk.
Yeah, there's a theme emerging, isn't there?
Just slightly. And he then shifts across to HMS Campania, which is another converted liner, but this time it's the Grand Fleet seaplane carrier. And he's a navigating officer, and he kind of gets bored with chugging around at sea, and likes the look of these aircraft. And he finds out they're having difficulty still getting accurate navigation over water. So he sort of says, "Okay, do you mind if I have a go?" So I say, "Yeah, okay, yes, sir. Let's pop in the back here and see how we go." And he helps pioneer over water navigation for the Royal Naval Air Service.
He's great.
After a while on Campania, doing the naval aviation bit, they basically give him a destroyer. In fact, they give him a couple of destroyers because one of them gets sunk. Yeah, theme again. He gets sunk in one, and he, in slightly controversial circumstances, sinks a U-boat himself.
That's right. Yeah.
And he ends the war as a Royal Navy commander. So I mean, he's already basically got a Royal Navy rank, which also makes him rather unusual. And he sort of retires from the sea after that, and goes into property speculation or something to that tune, I think it is. But obviously owns this little former Admiralty yacht, Sundowner, and when he hears that the evacuation is going ahead, he trots off to Chatham and says, "That's all right, I'll take her over." And not least because he's a retired naval officer, they sort of go, "All right then, not a problem. Here's some charts, go for it." So he and his son, who I think is in the Navy, there's a photograph of.
He's got 2 boys, hasn't he? I think. I get
2 or 3. I mean, this is the interesting bit, because of course, notably, he is the great model for Mr. Dawson, the Mark Rylance character in the 2017 movie, the Christopher Nolan job. And the whole sort of story about the dead son in the RAF, that's Lightoller. Lightoller's youngest son was flight lieutenant, I think, on Blenheim bombers.
3 sons, I've looked it up.
Yeah. And was shot down on one of the first raids of the war against the German fleet in Wilhelmshaven. Mm-hmm. So the sort of dead son in the RAF, that's Lightoller, and similarly the son and the Sea Scout. Although the young Sea Scout called Gerald in real life actually survives and gets back. But Lightoller, his son, and a young Sea Scout just take Sundowner over, and they bring back 113, I think it is, men from Leeches.
Doesn't it?
It's a fascinating story, but he manages to get. I mean, again, that's the story of the son sort of teaching him manoeuvres and so forth, or giving him messages from beyond the grave. And
I think his name was Brian, the youngest one, and I think it was the first day or the second day of the war.
Yeah,
second day of the war.
Yeah, that's the one. That's an absolutely incredible story. I mean, he wasn't the only one. You find that because there's a lot of trawlers take part in the evacuation, and a lot of them, again, not least because a number of their crews had RNR amongst them anyway. So they get to go across. They're among the key ones. There's a couple of lifeboat crews go across out of is it something like 19 lifeboats, RNLI lifeboats. 2 of them are sort of self-crewed by their own crew. There's a London fireboat. She still survives, by the way. Marvellous little vessel. Goes across under the command of the fire brigade, basically, and her own crew take her across. So it's certainly not unheard of for civilians to take their own boats across, but it's comparatively rare, and most of the crews do basically come out of Chatham Barracks and are very young officers enlisted, sailors in the Royal Navy. But they sort of start this massive trawl after just after the 26th, and some of them start arriving in a trickle beforehand, but really the key point where they hit the marvellous sight that you kind of get from the Christopher Nolan movie, where you get the small flotilla of small ships coming across. I see home and all this sort of stirring music. That's really sort of around the 29th. They really start to hit in numbers. And it's a whole range of boats. As I say, you get fireboats, you get tugs, trawlers. Notably, the Navy dig up their prototype, largely prototype landing craft. they've really only got about sort of 14, 15 of these things, and they sent about most of them across to Dunkirk. So they figure out that landing craft, supposed to be driven up onto a beach, drop the bow, and let troops off. Could that work?
In reverse,
back off? Yeah. Hell yeah, and it does. Does really quite nicely, but I mean that's another one that tends to be forgotten about a bit. But yeah, they do send their prototype landing craft across, and it turns into an absolutely formidable operation. So the initial expectation is from Ramsey's side is that they're going to maybe have about 3 days to get 45,000 or so off, and in the end, the weather holds far better than they anticipated. The defences hold far better than they anticipated, and they get 9 days, and they do actually basically pretty much get everybody off.
I was going to say, how many did they get off, and how much equipment did they get off? I'm guessing that's a jettison a lot.
Yeah, they get, certainly the British Expeditionary Force is largely outside of some who are, very few who are left behind in the rear guard. Essentially, the British Expeditionary Force is effectively withdrawn by the morning of the 3rd, and they go back one more night. Again, famous scene from the Nolan film where Kenneth Branagh stood there going, "I'm staying for the French," and I mean it wasn't quite that impromptu. I mean there was a certain level of debate over whether they would or not, but yeah, they came back for one final day. Ramsey was aware that his force was on the brink of exhaustion. I mean they'd had ship's crews breaking down through exhaustion already, and had to withdraw some ships just through crew fatigue as well as damage and so forth. He said, basically I can really only send them across this one last time. So they do on the night of the 3rd, 4th, and bring out another sort of 30 or so thousand French. But I mean the French had already been withdrawing their own troops anyway, and as to a degree had the British had been helping there. So it's again little known, but the French supply what's it called, the Pas-de-Calais flotilla under a Rear Admiral Marcel Landrieu, of again destroyers, trawlers, small boats, and so forth, under Ramsey's command.
And it's more than 100,000 French get off as well, don't they?
Oh God, yeah. I mean, it's north of 100,000. It's the total numbers brought off is 331,000, something like that. And yeah, as you say, it's north of 100,000 French, about 120,000 French, and the rest of them is the British Expeditionary Force. So it's really quite substantial. Massive evacuation that they managed to achieve. And when they finally pull out, the destroyer Shikari is the last ship out, HMS Shikari, and the French general sort of turns to the captain and says, "There's about 10,000. I think there's about 10,000 men left," and he was short by about 30,000. There's about 40,000 French troops left that, they're exhausted, their ammunition's exhausted, the defences are about to go, and later that morning, Admiral Abrial and Admiral Ramsey sort of sit down for a conference, and obviously Abrial is reluctant, but they concede that that's it, they can do no more. There's, and the order is given that they can surrender Dunkirk, and Dunkirk thereafter falls. But it's been at that point it's a phenomenal operation.
I have to ask you, right, so let's do a couple of quick fire questions. And I'm going to screw you with one of these. Right, your favourite little ship when you were writing the book?
Ooh, I mean, it's probably going to be Lightollah's Sundowner. I mean, the whole story surrounding it is just.
Oh, I love it because he is a piece of work, and I don't mean that in like a derogatory way. He just is a formidable bloke, isn't he? And he just takes no crap off of anybody.
I mean, and it's a story you'd have trouble writing as fiction. It would look preposterous if you went through Charles Lightollah's life.
But even like the PTSD after Titanic as well. Like there's a night his wife finds him just shivering in a bath of cold water and stuff. I mean, he wasn't unaffected by the things that happened to him, but just like the little engine that could, isn't he?
Oh yeah, it's an absolutely incredible guy. And yeah, it's an incredible story. And sadly, as you say, loses at least one of his sons. I think possibly both of them. I think the son in the Navy gets killed before the end of the war as well, sadly. But yeah, they then go on, and I mean his wife's quite formidable, and she I think at the age of something like 80 was piloting Sundowner across the Channel for one of the reunions of the Association of Dunkirk Little Ships. They're sort of 5-yearly crossings where they sort of gather everybody together and gather as many of the little ships as possible together and go across the Channel. And yeah, she's still doing that at age of 80.
And yeah, it was the eldest son is Roger, and he was killed in 45. It was a particular raid. The name escapes me, but he was on a torpedo boat, wasn't he?
Yeah, that's the one.
Yeah. Okay, Phil. Not to put you under any pressure. British Army was saved by little boats. True or false? You're like, oh my God, I cannot give you a quick answer to this.
It's kind of, sort of. Don't get me wrong, the little ships and the small boats are vitally important to the evacuation, as I kind of mentioned, because you've got to get people off of the beaches. But I mean, the absolute bulk is carried out by the destroyers and by the troop ships. Something like 2/3 of the total are brought out by the larger vessels. Obviously, you can't quite get a full tally of what the little ships do, because when you look at the final tally, the official final tally is people who were unloaded in Britain. And of course, many of the little ships didn't unload too many, if any, people in Britain. What they did was ferry people out to the bigger ships. So a lot of them shifted a lot more men than would immediately appear if you look at the final tallies. But yeah, the bulk of people leave the vicinity of Dunkirk aboard larger vessels.
So why are we so enamoured with the little ships?
Well, a lot of it's partly to do with the sheer romance. I mean, it's just such a terrific story that it keeps making itself into films, and starting off in 1942 with Mrs. Miniver, the multi-Oscar winner that year. Where the husband of Mrs. Miniver takes his little boat across and gets shot up a bit at Dunkirk. Obviously, the 1958 movie with Bernard Lee and Richard Attenborough as the civilians taking their boats across, and still out to 2017, where Mark Rylance does the Charles Lightoller bit, but don't mention that he was a Naval Reserve officer. Kind of missed that bit. So I mean, it's a spectacular story. It's got the great romance, the sort of civilian factor. Civilians are involved. It kind of gives an everyman feel to the war for a start. You get the little ships eulogized by the likes of J.B. Priestley, who famously talked about. I mean, this was primarily, actually, he was talking about the little holiday paddle steamers that were had been taken up as minesweepers. that went across. And his sort of favourite one, the Gracie Fields, was actually one of those that was lost at Dunkirk. Marvellous little radio broadcast about the little ships, the little steamers who made their journey into hell and came back glorious and all this sort of thing. And I mean, it just resonates, but it also kind of keeps resonating because inevitably the little ships themselves are, sort of apart from Dover Castle kind of thing, which is a bit difficult to get rid of. They are some of the key surviving material from the evacuation. The destroyers were obviously very hard pressed over the war, and became militarily obsolescent as well. So a lot of them were scrapped. A lot of the cross-channel ferries and so forth that had been the troop ships, again, commercial imperatives and age get to them, they get scrapped. And it's really because, of course, there's no great commercial imperative, and people love their riverboats and so forth that they own.
Alina's sitting there going, do they?
Yes, they do, Alina.
Yes, they do, Alina.
I know this seems strange to you, but
do they
you're
really?
Have to,
people love their boats, Alina. Where can we go to see little ships from Dunkirk?
All dotted around the country. A lot of them are all sort of in private hands.
Okay.
So, I mean, you've got Motor Torpedo Boat. She's in private hands. I forget where she's somewhere on the Medway, I think, MTB 102. But yeah, I mean, there's a lot of them still sort of around the Thames area. But largely in private hands. But I mean, there are others that aren't. Medway Queen, one of the paddle steamers, is sat on the Medway as a little museum type ship these days, being restored. There's also the Princess Elizabeth, actually in Dunkirk itself. She was actually filmed as part of the Nolan film. What else? You've also got. There's actually and here we go. Alina, wake up. There is a surviving destroyer from Dunkirk in Poland. The Polish destroyer Błyskawica. Apologies for the pronunciation. Sorry, Alina. She took part in the evacuation. Doesn't actually have a troop tally of people brought back. Her primary role was basically anti-aircraft cover and anti-E-boat cover, protecting ships that were basically taking troops back. And I mean, she ends up towing a couple of ships in the direction of Dover when they get hit and damaged and so forth. But she is the last surviving destroyer of Dunkirk, and you can go and see her in Gdynia, I believe, as a museum ship in Poland. There's a fair few around the place, but a lot of them, as I say, tend to be in private hands, but they do assemble fairly frequently. I mean, there are sort of smaller get-togethers almost annually, and they'll be turning up for things like the big river pageant for the Queen's Jubilee. It was a big event for them, and as I say, there's their 5-yearly get-together as well, the 5-yearly commemorative crossing that they've been doing at least since, I think, 1950. Actually, was the first time they did it. But the Dunkirk Little Ships Association was put together in '65, so that took a little bit longer. But yeah, there are quite a few of them around, and you can go and see them, and you will find them frequently out and about at big events.
Phil, thank you for such a wonderful, insightful chat with us.
You are so ungrateful.
No, I'm trying to find my words here. Right, I would just like for you to tell our listeners where they can get hold of your book. What is it called? Can you please remind us?
The book is called Dunkirk and Little Ships. It's got a few slightly bigger ships in there as well. But it's available from Amazon, from Waterstones, from all good bookshops. I believe it's being stocked by a number of museums. I think the National Maritime Museum will have it once they're reopened. I'm vaguely hoping that Dover Castle might stock it and a couple of others. So yeah, it is out and about there in all good bookshops, Amazon and so forth, in paperback, or of course you can get it in e-version as well.
Fabulous. Thank you so much for joining us, Phil.
Thank you, Phil. I've had a great time.
Join us tomorrow when Helen King will be with us to talk all about fake medical history in the ancient world. Do you know what annoys her, having put many, many years into writing about Hippocrates and ancient medicine, is the amount of nonsense memes that go around on the internet, misinforming you about the ancients and how they looked after their bodies. So we've addressed a number of them and had a great time doing it, so don't miss that. We are now on YouTube. We are posting all of our new episodes on there, and we have our own channel, and we are gradually posting all of the back episodes because we have been made aware of the fact that you can only find the last 100 on some platforms. So you can go and listen to your heart's content and laugh at the cartoons and have a great time. So do go over there and subscribe. Don't forget, you can become a patron of History Hack for as little as $1 a month. Just go to www.historyhack.podbean.com. It will help us keep going in the aftermath of the coronavirus, and we would really appreciate it, as we would love to do so.